Okay, I'm gonna roll right into making this next video, talking about LSD, ayahuasca, San Pedro, mescaline. Uh, I think I'll start with LSD because LSD is a very, very powerful psychedelic. Uh, Without exception, from what I understand right now, last time I looked into this, LSD is the most powerful psychedelic by weight, which is why if you've ever taken it or received it or heard people talking about it, it's spoken about in micrograms, I believe, which is a very, very small amount. Almost, I don't know of any other drug that I've ever heard of or substance that gets weighed out in micrograms. A tiny little drop on a piece of paper, or a tiny little drop to take. So, for one, I think it's important for people to realize that LSD is super potent, and you want to be careful to never take too much on accident, because the repercussions of that are many, many hours long. and it's a little and it's a little and there's a lot of reasons that it's kind of dangerous to take it, because at least last I checked into it, there's not a lot of good chemistry being done for it. A lot of it is very weak. So, and usually when you start taking, the first times you take it, you don't have very good connections. So you have very weak LSD. So you get used to this experience of taking it and having little to nothing happen. I think a fair amount of people have this experience until the time you do get some relatively good or strong LSD. You expect it to not work, so you take a lot, and then you have this super long trip. And LSD, I would say, depending on how much you take, lasts easily 6, 8, or even 12 hours. So, I had some pretty profound experiences with LSD, but for me, the feeling of LSD is, it's not as clear and pure to me as I feel like the organic psychedelics can be. And whereas I always felt with psychedelics like ayahuasca and mushrooms and San Pedro that I very much was able to tune into it and not control my experience is quite the right word, but have some ability to regulate. I had more ability to regulate how hard I would be tripping. I could ease myself deeper into it if I wanted, or I could bring myself out of it and, be functioning very simply. With organic psychedelics, it's more like there was this thing I could open up really big and let that energy just pour through me, and all this stuff that I could experience through that, but I could close it off too if I wanted, and keep it contained and held. But then with LSD, my eyes keep doing weird things, and I remember psychedelics and LSD. With LSD, it's more almost like there was this crush from behind that I could try to hold back, but the crush would still be coming, and I could let myself be pushed along by it, and I could still work with it and control it and hold it back to some degree, but it was much less pleasant on a certain level to do long term, and especially because it is so long. And the come up for LSD is hours and hours long, and then the come down is hours and hours long. It's very slow in both directions. So I think that's all I want to say about that. I feel fortunate that I never had a really bad LSD experience, because I feel like that it takes a lot longer, to come out of that, and there's a lot more potential to get blasted into like crazy spaces if you take too much, which is very easy to do. But then then there's ayahuasca and San Pedro, as well as mushrooms, which in the New Age communities, the spiritual community that I was part of, there was a lot of people taking those things, out of some desire to connect to indigenous shamanism, or in one way or another be connected to the earth. Like one thing a friend once said to me that I think is very true in a certain sense. She said, eating mushrooms is like taking a love potion for the earth. And there is a fair bit of truth in that. And for me, I think, again, that mushrooms, ayahuasca, and San Pedro are very similar energy. There's nuances to them, but I feel like the difference is if someone is good with one of those, they're generally pretty good at working with all three of them. That was my experience, that I was very good with mushrooms, and working with ayahuasca and San Pedro came pretty naturally to me as well after that experience. So where was I? Yeah, there's a lot of people taking these, and there's ayahuasca groups, which I participated in a little bit when I was around 25, 26. I sat in a circle with a Peruvian shaman that would tour around, I'm sure, the world, but I knew him touring around California. And the group, we'd get in a circle and people would drink the ayahuasca. Various people would play traditional or non-traditional songs. There's this specific healing music that goes with the ayahuasca, but there's also healing music that people have developed. I would share a little bit in those circles, but I never got deep into that element of it. And it's one reason I was invited to, is people were like, oh, like you have a really cool, like, music thing you do. So but within these medicine circles, as they call them, people are supposed to be doing it to heal. That's the idea. And what I saw going into these spaces was that, people weren't really getting anywhere further with these psychedelics, with the ayahuasca. Maybe it's different down in South America, where the traditions come from, where I would assume that the ceremonies are done, they're timed better, I would say. They're done more like when there's really a true calling for them, as opposed to just like, oh, like a bunch of, white people with some money, would all be down to get together and throw in a couple $100 to, rent the space and sit inside the heiau, not the heiau, the maloka or whatever. Usually it's not so aligned, and I think the people are not really having significant growth happening in these circles. I think they're getting that feeling like something powerful is happening because you drink the ayahuasca and you're there and you feel like this really intense energy of like, 10, 20, even 30 people sometimes, 10, 20, 25 people, all like very high on ayahuasca. And, there's you could say there's like spirits and there's energies like moving around, and there's this intense music that's really like powerfully affecting your physio, energetic, and emotional systems. People are throwing up. I had an experience where in my first circle where I was, very, very high on the ayahuasca, very, very much. And then and I was feeling like nauseous and not good. And I hope that didn't fuck with it. And the shaman from Peru, he started, singing and rattling, singing this healing song, and it was like a fucking demon was being ripped out of me. I started like convulsing and like feeling my body like thrown around where I was sitting, and then I threw up really intensely. And as I came out, as I sat back after like throwing up into the bucket in front of me, because I give everyone buckets to throw up in, then the shaman like ran over to me, and because I felt myself like leaving my body, I felt like I'd thrown up and like purged this intense amount of something, and then it's like I felt my spirit like lifting out of my body, and the shaman ran over and grabbed my hand. And when he grabbed my hand, it like pulled my soul, my spirit back into my body. And then I was back, and then I looked at him. It was dark, and I looked where he was. And I said, "Oh, I'm good. I'm here." And he was like, "Oh, okay." and then moved on. But that was a crazy night because everyone got served way too much. It was kind of irresponsible of the shaman guy, really. But there was a sense of like epicness and beauty, and you have all these experiences. But then again, it's like, did we actually really grow? Like, I would say no. Like, not really. Like, I didn't see people, not that I knew those people very well, but you can get the sense. So that was that. And that was actually after. It's kind of nuts that I did that after. But it was after I'd had an experience with mushrooms that I would not wish on anyone. And to me highlights the danger of taking these substances in a way that's just like irresponsible. Like just plain like irresponsible and stupid. And this was when I was on my way back from a big festival, from the Oregon Eclipse Festival. I think that was in 2017. And I was traveling with a partner, an ex-partner, just broken up, and two friends that I either didn't know very well or didn't really trust very much. And we stopped in a very energetically potent place. Some places the energy is just intense. Some locations. We stopped somewhere that was very energetically intense, and we camped, and we all took a very high dose of mushrooms, like an eighth, 3 grams or so, at least 2 or 3 grams each, the 4 of us. And without going into too much detail, just want to say that the concentration of energy, along with the people I didn't trust or didn't know very well, led to something which was very traumatic for me. And I was being directly attacked by my ex, and in a way I don't even resent her for. Like, I'd done a lot of really, really kind of like nasty things to her. So she took this period to be very vicious on me in certain ways. And that, coupled with the place we were and the other 2 people who I didn't know that well, didn't feel that great with, honestly, led me to have this feeling like I was just trapped in a reality that I could not control. That reality was out of my control and very bad, essentially. I feel like there's a slightly better way of putting it. But after I came down, I felt like I was in kind of a perpetual panic attack attack, that everything was out of my control, and I had no guarantee that the world was a good place, that the universe or reality was a good place. And I was so uncomfortable, and no one could really understand. I think for roughly the next year, I had this background feeling of just like I was in a panic attack, and no one could relate. It was unpleasant, to say the least. I'd never had anything like that happen to me, but it was because largely of this very irresponsible psychedelic trip. And I talked to a guy years later on Maui who I think who had gone through something similar with mushrooms, and I feel glad that in that moment I kind of energetically, I could feel when he said it, like, oh yeah, I had this really hard experience with mushrooms. And he was someone deep in the New Age community. Really good guy, ultimately, too. And I was like, oh yeah, I had something like that happen. And I felt like, I had this panic attack going on in the back of my consciousness for like a long time. And he was like, oh yeah, that is what it feels like. So trip responsibly if you do. And again, this was well past the time when it was actually beneficial in a personal evolution standpoint for me to be taking any psychedelics. I want to remind people that there can be significant consequences. Like usually you're going to be fine, but sometimes you won't be, and sometimes you won't be for a while. And being opened up to these energies, being sensitized, which these psychotropics do, they basically expand your awareness of the non-physical reality and makes it much more possible to connect, not just to like God, which I think is very possible. I think God does come and connect with us there when our exploration is pure, when there's actually an alignment. Like for me, I feel like there was an alignment in my 17 to 20-year-old life to be exploring mushrooms, and I think that I was connecting with God to a certain degree, but for a long time I wasn't. And since I wasn't, and since many people aren't, they're connecting to things which want to manipulate you. And this comes again to when you open yourself up like that, beings can fuck with you and can, work their way into your consciousness, and not just non-physical beings, but other people as well. Like I've seen and kind of felt how the kind of like self-proclaimed shamans, particularly in Western culture, will get these followings around them, which are very odd looking overall. A bunch of, new agey people that are just a little bit in awe of this person who, gives them ayahuasca and sings basically in circles. There's one guy in particular that had a big kind of like aura following around him. Spent a lot of his time in Hawaii or California, and a lot of my friends would talk about him, in a very kind of like wow, like this, what this guy does is amazing. And then years later, as I was starting to exit the conscious community, I ran into this guy on 3 separate occasions in California, and I was disillusioned by the spiritual community at that point. So I was already on my way out, like pretty far out already. And then I met this guy, and I was like, whoa, like this is the guy I've heard so much about for so long. And I was like, he seems very insecure. And he also seemed like he covered his insecurity with arrogance. And he was a very, very good musician. So it's funny how people mistake good musicianship for like enlightenment or something like that very easily. And I also felt like what I could sense on a certain level was this quiet intensity and sense of like he was like shaking on the inside from like that sort of background panic attack that I felt from that bad trip a long time. It was like he was always in that, but just barely covering it up, and like had to have everyone around him feel like he was the most amazing person ever. So I'm not going to name that person outright because he's kind of well known. I don't feel like getting random blowback from people, but if you want to know who that is or was, if you knew me in that community back then, you might know this person. I'm happy to talk more personally about it. Because others I encountered over the years also had this sense of like, I'm not so sure about that guy. And now I get why they said that. I'm very not sure about that guy. In fact, I think he's like got some like fucked up energy around him, honestly. Let's see. I'm not sure if there's anything else I want to share here. Haven't had psychedelics in at least 4 years now, I think. Close to 4 years. But it could have been forever. I mean, I think that's it. Just my general opinions about that element of psychedelics and new ageiness, and everyone thinks they're the coolest, when they sit in ayahuasca circles. It's a very like high status new age person thing to do. And some people there, are really cool, but they're just kind of stuck in it. Like the woman who introduced me to my first to the ayahuasca group that I sat with a few times is like a very cool, very like aware person who I feel like she just can't quite get out of that community. Like she remembers when it was awesome for her and it hasn't been for a while, but she can't completely leave. I don't know why entirely. Kind of. Okay, that'll be all for now.